Today, we're looking back on middle school, that fun, wistful time, a time of transition and joyous discovery. Okay, who am I kidding? It was not fun for me or any of my friends. It totally sucked. We're always asking ourselves, who am I? Am I a kid or am I a teenager? Can I say that? Why is everyone cooler than me? What is going on with my skin? You're not sure about anything, except that those first teenage years were rough. To decode the mystery of middle school is the amazing Phyllis Figel, who's been there, done that, and has written the book on this subject. Quite literally, she's written a book called Middle School Matters, the 10 key skills kids need to thrive in middle school and beyond, and how parents can help. She's a school counselor for K-8 children and teens, a psychotherapist, and get this, a columnist for the Washington Post. I mean, wow, could we get any luckier than having her say yes to teen work? Miss Figel, thanks like a million for being here.
Thanks for having me. I wasn't sure where you were going with that intro. I was so excited that you described middle school as joyous. It's how I want people to describe it, but probably more realistic the way you actually experienced it.
Yeah, all right. So to dive right into the book you've written, you wrote a book called Middle School Matters, where you talk about the 10 skills that middle schoolers require to handle the transition into teenage life. So I read up a little bit about it and did some research on it, and it's amazing. And although a lot of the references that you gave were from the American school system and life, so much of what you say is universal. So firstly, what did you see and hear from preteens and teens that led you to make this book? And what are the universal takeaways for all of us who will be watching this from India, from Dubai, from the US, from everywhere?
So I love what you said about how you were able to relate to the skills, because I think that it's the phase that defines it more than the structure of the school or even the country that you're in. This is just a developmental phase where kids are changing faster than they have at any time other than from birth to age 2. And they're figuring out their identity. And they're doing all of that while experiencing every emotion on a scale of 1 to 10. And they have very little life experience or perspective. So I always reassure parents who have some dread about going into this phase once again with their kids, that it's not that the experiences kids have in this phase are inherently worse than bad experiences you have later. It's just that you can't contextualize it yet. And you're going through puberty, which makes everything harder.
Of course. So what you're saying is that during this phase, because it's just the beginning stages of puberty and these children don't actually have any experience of dealing with these issues yet, they're going to have to learn about it, from scratch, essentially.
That's right. And that's why I actually think that middle school is, I call it the last best chance. It's this opportunity to really help them solidify their values, help them develop all the skills they'll need, not only in middle school, but much later. So some of the skills that I talk about in Middle School Matters are things like making good friend choices, dealing with having a teacher you don't like, getting organized and figuring out how you learn best, figuring out how to self-regulate your emotions. You're not going to be able to do any of the above if you can't take care of your emotions. And so starting with the inside, starting with figuring out who you are and what's important to you, and then working out. So the social piece, the learning, your goals, recovering when things go wrong, all of those are such critical skills. And middle school to me is just a prime time to acquire them, and for adults in their lives to help them acquire them.
So I love that you talk about the early teenage years, because getting in before or early is so important for parents and educators to support their kids in their transition to adolescence. Now, to sort of hone in on the question here, what are some red flags for parents and educators to watch out for?
So I think one of the things that parents and educators misunderstand is that all stress isn't bad. There is a certain amount of stress that is motivating, that is good, that gets you to get out of a situation that might be dangerous, to heed your spidey sense. And as long as kids can cope with this stress, they have the reserves, they have the resources, they have the mental health support, if that's what it is, then they're probably doing just fine. It's when their capacity to manage the stress is less than the amount of stress. And I think that's particularly important now after a few years that have been so disruptive, particularly for middle schoolers. And so stress is additive and kids don't have those reserves anymore. And so we're really looking to see if they're exhibiting any changes in major areas of their life. Maybe they're suddenly not hanging out with their friends or doing things they used to love to do. They're not sleeping. Their weight has changed in one direction or another to an extreme. They're constantly by themselves. It's normal for them to spend more time by themselves. We know that the early teen years are when kids want to separate from parents and spend more time with peers. But just looking for those signs that they are unable to handle the normal developmental stress that comes with the phase on their own.
So you actually kind of gave us a really great transition to the next question. So when schools reopened this year, like after the pandemic, most parents believe that their children will get back to the, sort of regular, normal routine in their lives. But a lot has changed for everyone, and we don't even know what the new normal means. Can you talk about you talk about this actually already in your recent article in the Washington Post. So can you tell us how parents can help children have a better school year?
Yes, I think one of the reasons last year was so hard is that superficially, things looked normal. Many kids were back in school just as they had been before the pandemic. At some point in the year, most people were able to shed masks, and everybody was blindsided when kids struggled more than they expected. They were more sensitive. They were less mature. They had fewer coping mechanisms. Maybe their academics took a hit. Maybe they weren't socially awkward, but they felt really socially awkward. And they didn't have the stamina they had. If they were able to do 10 activities before, they might only be able to do one activity now. What I think is the bright side of going into this new school year is that our expectations are, I hope, perhaps more realistic. And I think that's important for teens themselves to remember, to set attainable standards for themselves, and for parents to remind kids, and for educators to remind kids that life is not a straight line from, point A to success. And you have to break things down. And right now, we might need to break things down even more in order for kids to set themselves up for success. And I think setting kids up for success is key. Meeting them where they are, not using words like, quote unquote, fallen behind. I have yet to meet a teen or a kid who does better because someone says that they're lacking in some way or they're not where they should be. Cool. So that's where we need to meet them right now, is exactly where they are.
Bullying is a hot button issue. And while it's not specific to teenagers, it can get quite intense and dangerous around this age. And we know that it manifests itself in different ways: physical, verbal, even cyberbullying. And we know it's traumatic and scarring. So the obvious victims here are the ones who were bullied. No one's questioning that. And, obviously these children need support. But we need to understand bullies as well, like as in who and why and what can be done. So could you please share your insights on the issue of bullying and also the larger long-term implications of it, and how the school system, parents, and teenagers can work around it?
Yeah, sure. First, I just want to give a little primer on what bullying is and what it isn't, because I think it's very misunderstood. For something to be considered bullying, it has to have the 3 Ps: power, pattern, and purpose. That there's a power differential. Somebody intends to wound the person, and there's a pattern of behavior. It's not a one-off mean comment. It's not 2 kids who have the same social status just going at it with one another. And when something is truly bullying, it's really rare that a child can handle it on their own. So as the parent, as the teacher, if you see this, you want to call it out. You want to be addressing it. You don't want to be forcing the child who's been targeted to get together with the person who perpetrated that abuse, because they can end up rescarring that child. That's something that you want to be doing very carefully when you know exactly what to expect and when you have the buy-in of the child who is targeted. For the child who's doing that behavior, I always say to parents, call out meanness, because it is just as risky to be the person using power and aggression to gain status as it is to be targeted. And in some ways, they actually have worse outcomes. There's research showing that kids who don't develop those skills of likability and who continue to bully others through 12th grade, not only do they have more addiction, more depression, less job stability, more failed relationships. There's even a region of the brain that is responsible for things like empathy and self-compassion that is smaller. So we want to be nipping that behavior young, particularly in those middle school years, which is when bullying is at its peak, because empathy is still developing. Kids don't have a lot of ability to adopt someone else's perspective. Nobody can be more offended by not getting invited to a party than a 12-year-old, even if they didn't invite that other person to their own birthday party. So just recognizing that kids are making mistakes, they're experimenting with this behavior. We want to nip it when we see it. We want to be really thoughtful about how we handle it when it happens. And we want to be helping kids themselves resist that behavior. So I might explain to students that just because you have a feeling doesn't mean you can't help it, that you have to act a certain way. You can sit on your hands for 10 seconds and just ask yourself, could this come back to haunt me? Could this hurt somebody else? Am I likely to regret it in the morning? Just pausing long enough and recognizing that even if you feel mad, even if you feel jealous or angry or any of those emotions sometimes kids see as shameful, you don't have to act on them. And I'll share one other strategy that I think can be helpful for teens themselves. I like to have kids go through their feeds. It could be their texts, it could be their snaps, their Instagram, and find the post or the text that doesn't fit with the rest. Maybe they were trying to be funny and it landed wrong, or maybe they over disclosed and then felt overexposed, or maybe they lied about something and then didn't know how to reel it back in. And then ask yourself, what was going on when I made that post? Was I overtired? Was I in my bedroom on technology late at night? Was I angry and I should have paused, so that you can avoid making that same mistake again?
Now, I'm going off of what you said because you brought up social media. Cyberbullying is a real issue, in society today among teenagers. So I want to know what your thoughts on this are.
So just first want to give a shout out to the Cyberbullying Research Center, Samir Hinduja's site, and Justin Patchen. It has a lot of really great resources in that area. I would tell kids that don't ever hesitate to block, to ignore, to not engage, to even report to a social media company if there's something that should come down, if it's reputation damaging. But this is something to get help. I think that skill of being able to ask for help is so key. Kids don't necessarily intuitively know who and when to ask for help. So all of the adults in their lives need to be sharing with them that they're a helper, how they can seek them out for support, and what some of those situations might be when they would need that support.
Right. So, is there anything else you have in store?
Thanks so much for asking. I actually have another book coming out next summer. I'm wrapping it up right now. It's called Middle School Superpowers: Raising Resilient Tweens in Turbulent Times. And it's really coming on the heels of the pandemic, but it's about helping middle schoolers recover from all of the blows they experienced during the phase, or all of just the churn and change.
It's essentially a new, made for teenagers after the pandemic, so that they have a greater understanding of what they can do to deal with any mental health issues that may have popped up during the pandemic?
Yes, it's written in the same way Middle School Matters is. The audience primarily is parents and educators, but teens could certainly read it. But it's about kind of the research on resilience and my experiences professionally and my thoughts on how you can recover, whether you get dumped or fired by a friend, or you fail a quiz, or you don't get into the high school you want to get into, and your friend does, you don't get on a travel team, you don't get voted into a student government office, or your parents get divorced, you have a sickness, you have a learning challenge. It could be really anything, but navigating the hard stuff, which is really a personal interest on the heels of seeing kids really struggle to a greater degree than they had prior to the pandemic.
We've all been there, after the pandemic. It's super relevant to what the world's going through right now. So thank you for writing this.
My pleasure.
Ms. Fagel, this was super insightful. I'm sure many people will feel very understood from watching this. I know I sort of did, it really spoke to my experience personally in middle school. I'm sure everyone will learn a lot as it is. So thank you so much for being here again.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for caring enough as a 17-year-old to be addressing these issues and trying to improve the state of mental health across the world. I think that's amazing. So thank you for that.